Sunshine is a game where you can play as a silly little floating ball of sun on a mission to collect pretty little flowers while exploring the environment. Although, beware, as there are dark, muddy puddles which the player must avoid, otherwise, they'll risk the sun being let out. This concept is connected to the idea of botanics, as I had the idea for the player playing as the sun, due to the interest and relationship of photosynthesis. The idea that the sun is out searching for these flowers as it treats them like little pets, finding beauty in the plants and nature as its presence of its light feeds them. So I wanted to make a cute little simple game where the sun's main goal was to find these precious little flowers, as most of the gameplay is to ensure that they find all of the flowers necessary to move on to the next level. Meanwhile, the player had to make sure that they were avoiding the dark void-like puddles, which would make the sun retreat back to where it began, forcing the player to restart their adventure. With the main gameplay of Sunshine focusing on just the exploring and parkour elements, as I found that it would fit the theme better that the player could focus on the environment's design and sounds, so that they can feel immersed and encapsulated with the world, with the main idea of it being empty and lacking human presence, such as buildings, vehicles, people, etc., to emphasize the theme of botanics that there is only one nature occurring. So first we have the main menu script. This is really simple. It basically just loads scene 1, aka, the game scene. And this basically just quits the game application upon click. These are all pulled into the button functions, which is why they're public. And then for the pause menu, I used a public static rule here. This is just so it becomes a global variable, so anything becomes paused when you open the pause menu. In the void update, I made it so that if the escape button is pressed down, it pops up, or down depending on whether it's paused or not. So if the player was to open it, press escape, it would open, and if the player was to press escape again, then it would resume the game, basically. And then with the public void pause game, this freezes the time so that the game properly pauses, for example, animations. And with the go to main menu, also resumes the timescale. So when it pauses, it goes to 0. That way it freezes. However, when the player presses resume game or presses go to main menu, then it resumes at the normal timescale. For the introduction UI text, I put using Temporal so that it can reference the Text Mesh Pro text. When I was setting up my variables, I made a reference to the Text Mesh Pro component so I can reference it. To have different lines, I set up public string so that I can edit the lines in the engine and have as many as I need. And then I have my public float text speed, which will be used to set out what speed I want the text to be typed out at. So that will go to what speed I want. Basically, in the void update, if the player gets mouse button down, then the text moves to the next line. And then I use an enumerator just so that I can have characters being typed out one by one. With this line, taking the string and breaking it down into a character array. So for the flower collectors, I have was basically just an empty part called Flower Manager with this script, and it's using the Unity Engine UI so that whenever the player collects a flower, it adds a string to the collectible. So basically, I've also added a public game object door So what this does is it just has the door to the next level, and it will destroy the door if the player has up to 5 of the flowers. And so the UI here basically will have the amount of flowers that is specified here. And then for the actual collect, so like where the player will collide with the flower, it will destroy the flower. Also, public flower manager, FM, it's for the flower manager part. So that empty part is dragged into that bit. And then on trigger enter 2D collider collision. If it's collided, then what happens is it will destroy the game object, aka the flower, and it will add 1 to the count, the plus. It'll add 1 to the count. And what I've done is I've made it so that if the count equals this, for example, if it equals 1, it will play the flower collect sound. It does that up to 5. However, what I've also done, just so the player can understand to go back to the door, is added a sound of the key unlocking, just so they know they've collected enough in case they didn't read the starting dialogue, which mentions that the player's objective in that certain level is to get 5. I made free floats for speed, jump power, and horizontal input so that I can mess with the jump and speed to my liking, basically. With horizontal input being what moves the character. So in the start function, I initialized both the animator and the rigid body so that I can add certain animations as well as how the player collides with their environment as well. To make the character move in the fixed update, I added the rigid body, aka the RB's horizontal input times the move speed here, with the RB velocity being Y, as in it moves sideways. And then for the flipping of the actual sprite, I had actually made it in a separate script where if input equals 0 and is facing right, then horizontal input equals 0 and is doing the opposite of facing right, basically. Back to the movement script. For sound specifically, I had added a jump sound. However, because it's a floating ball of sun, I realized it wouldn't really have a full animation since it's never on the floor, or in the sense that it wouldn't make a sound because it would never touch the floor. So initially I was going to have a fallen noise as well as a fallen animation. However, I decided against it. For example, with the animations as grounded jump, there's not really a difference. There's no specific animations for the jump or the fallen, so it really just switches between the moving sideways animations and the idle animation. And then it's just a really simple script for the actual puddle kill. So if the player was to touch a puddle on collision, then anyone with the compare tag player, aka the player, would be transformed back to the position of the respawn point, which is all the way back where they initially spawned, which is a public part, and so is the game object, so they could be dragged into the script. Now, scripting coding was never my forte, so this project was definitely the hardest one for me out of the rest of my projects, as I was and still am incredibly unfamiliar with it. However, I can definitely say I've improved and made myself proud, as this was the part of the course I was dreading. I learned Unity's engine much better and how to make use of things such as URP lights, particles, animations, etc. I've also improved on learning coding structure and how it should be organised. Something that took me countless nights was the collectible, as I had many errors with it, as well as how to go about creating a pause menu, but it taught me how to benefit from forums and how to go about fixing certain errors I come across.